With the chaotic morning traffic buzzing around her, Chidera Okafor desperately navigated her delivery motorcycle through the crowded streets, knowing she was already terribly late. Behind her, the food container rattled with every bump in the road, while her phone vibrated non-stop with angry calls from a hungry customer. She kept chanting her daily mantra of making money, saving every coin, and clearing her massive debts, which occupied her mind completely. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the desperate voice of an elderly man pleading with a harsh bread seller. The old man explained that his grandson was coming and begged for just a single loaf on credit. But the vendor yelled at him to leave, refusing to run a charity. The vendor's harsh voice cut through the street noise as he shoved the elderly man, calling him a shameless beggar and telling him to get out of his sight. Chidera felt a sudden pang of sympathy and rushed forward to catch the old man before he hit the dusty ground, gently asking if he was all right. When she angrily confronted the aggressive seller for treating an elder with such disrespect over a simple loaf of bread, the man just scoffed, defending his business. Recognizing the old man's vulnerability, Chidera reached into her pocket and pulled out her emergency fuel money. It was only 1,000 naira, cash she desperately needed to survive the day, but she knew she could not leave him hungry. Observing the smirk on the vendor's face, Chidera realized he was overcharging her on purpose. But she did not back down and demanded 2 loaves instead of 1. She handed the fresh bread to the frail old man, guiding him to sit down and rest his weak legs. The old man sighed deeply, murmuring that hundreds of people had passed him by without offering a single glance of pity. His heavy words pierced Chidera's soul, instantly reminding her of how helpless her own mother had been during her final days in the hospital. She gently checked him for injuries, asking about his late grandson, before introducing herself as Chidera, a name the old man warmly praised as belonging to a truly good heart. Amused by her kindness, the old man remarked that she would make an excellent wife for his grandson, but Chidera quickly brushed the suggestion aside with a tired smile. She explained that marriage was a luxury she could not afford when she was drowning in heavy debts and struggling daily just to survive. Though the old man pitied her heavy burdens, Chidera knew she had to rush back to her delayed delivery, so she quickly scribbled her phone number on a scrap of paper and handed it to him. As she rode away with his blessings ringing in her ears, a luxury black sedan suddenly pulled up near the curb, and 2 towering security guards immediately stepped out to clear the path. A tall, striking young man stepped out from the rear of the second vehicle, exuding an undeniable aura of authority and quiet power. This was Azoka Ezani, the 28-year-old leader of the massive Ezani Group, one of the most powerful private corporations in the entire nation. He approached his grandfather with a rare look of concern beneath his usually cold and calculating expression, offering an apology for his delayed arrival. However, the stubborn old man immediately cut him off, complaining that his tardiness had allowed his future wife to get away. Azoka stared at his grandfather in utter disbelief, wondering if the heat or some sudden confusion was making the old man lose his mind. With stubborn enthusiasm, the old man described the wonderful girl named Chidera, who had defended him and bought him bread when a cruel vendor pushed him. Azoka's protective instincts flared up at the mention of the physical assault, but his grandfather brushed it off, praising Chidera's genuine respect and rare kindness. Azoka rolled his eyes, stating firmly that he was not going to marry a complete stranger just because of a simple loaf of bread. But the old patriarch was determined to track down this mysterious savior, lecturing his grandson about his stubborn, single life. Realizing that arguing with his grandfather on this topic was completely useless, Azoka remained silent. Later that afternoon, Chidera answered her vibrating phone to hear the trembling voice of the elderly man she had helped earlier. He claimed to be suffering from a tight chest and blurry vision, pleading with her to come to his aid at a specific address. Overcome with worry, Chidera immediately agreed to drop everything, despite having several hungry customers waiting for their deliveries. Meanwhile, far from any actual medical danger, the mischievous Papa Ezani was sitting comfortably in a luxurious living room, looking perfectly healthy. Azoka watched his grandfather with deep disapproval, warning the old man that faking a serious illness like this was taking his little game entirely too far. Defending his scheme, the old man argued that he needed to test Chidera's character to see if she would help a poor man with absolutely nothing to offer. Azoka remained deeply cynical, predicting that the young woman would never waste her valuable time on a destitute elder. Although he had mountains of corporate documents waiting on his desk, his love for his grandfather kept him anchored in the room. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Chidera rushed in, her face pale with genuine panic as she asked if she should call an ambulance. Seeing her breathless and deeply concerned, the old man offered a reassuring smile, realizing his test had already yielded a beautiful result. Urging calm, the grandfather smiled warmly and claimed that his pain had miraculously vanished the moment she walked through the door. Chidera paused, her sharp eyes scanning the comfortable room, before she realized she had been thoroughly tricked by his dramatic act. She expressed her frustration, explaining that she had abandoned her work and rushed over in a panic because she truly believed his life was in danger. Yet, even as she voiced her anger, Chidera gently checked his pulse and adjusted his seating to make sure he was comfortable. Watching this display of selfless care, Azoka felt his cold skepticism begin to melt, wondering if this girl was genuinely different from the rest. Introducing his grandson with a proud grin, the old man presented Azoka as a successful, handsome 28-year-old bachelor who was fully prepared for marriage. Chidera looked at the tall stranger properly for the first time, offering a polite greeting which Azoka returned with an embarrassed sigh. He apologized for his grandfather's pushy matchmaking, explaining that the old patriarch loved to control people's lives. Chidera maintained her stance, stating firmly that she had absolutely no desire to marry a complete stranger, especially when she was buried under heavy debts. But the old man brushed her objections away, insisting that love would naturally grow between them in time. Promising her a life of luxury, the grandfather claimed she would receive beautiful houses and endless wealth if she joined their family. To test her reaction, Azoka quickly interrupted, painting a completely different picture of their lives by claiming the luxury car was borrowed and that they were actually poor. He explained that his grandfather had foolishly spent his entire pension just to rent this massive house for 24 hours to impress her. Instead of turning cold or showing disappointment, Chidera responded with genuine warmth, saying there was no shame in struggling since she also lived in a tiny rented room and rode a delivery bike. Azoka stood there, completely speechless at her humility. While most women would have walked away upon learning they were poor, Chidera's gentle expression did not change in the slightest. She gently scolded the old man, advising him not to waste his pension on renting luxury estates, since she cared nothing for fancy cars or big mansions. Her words delighted the grandfather, but the warm moment was shattered when Chidera's phone rang with a harsh call from her aunt. Her aunt demanded immediate payment for her late mother's medical bills, coldly stating that the debt had now risen to 2 million naira due to heavy interest. Chidera pleaded with her relative to show mercy, reminding her that the deceased woman was her own sister. The cruel aunt showed no sympathy, threatening to throw all of Chidera's mother's clothes, family pictures, and cherished memories into the trash if the money was not paid immediately. Fighting back tears, Chidera begged her not to touch her mother's final belongings, desperately promising to find the funds somehow. She quickly wiped her wet eyes before turning back to the men, trying to maintain her composure. Watching this painful scene unfold, Azoka felt his old suspicions return, wondering if this entire emotional phone call was just a clever act to manipulate them for money. Before he could speak, his grandfather looked at him with immense gravity and ordered him to marry her. Shocked by his grandfather's sudden command, Azoka protested, while Chidera firmly stated she would never marry out of pity. Azoka turned to her, coldly warning her that marrying a supposedly broke man like him would only bring hardship, not the comfortable life she might be dreaming of. To his surprise, Chidera looked him dead in the eye and agreed to the marriage, but only on one condition. She needed an immediate loan of 2 million naira. Hearing this massive sum, Azoka's jaw tightened, as his worst fears about her greed seemed to be confirmed. However, Chidera quickly clarified that she would repay every single naira, explaining she only needed the money to save her late mother's legacy. Rushing aside the massive sum as a mere trifle, the grandfather immediately pulled out his phone to order the transfer of the full 2 million naira. Chidera watched him with growing confusion, wondering how a supposedly retired pensioner could command such rapid financial power with a single call. Noticing her suspicious gaze, Azoka quickly lied, explaining that his grandfather simply had influential connections from his younger days. Once the transaction was confirmed, the old patriarch stood up triumphantly and announced they were heading straight to the marriage registry that very afternoon. Both young people stared at him in utter shock, unable to believe he was serious. The old man dismissed their protests, arguing that silent hesitation was as good as full agreement when destiny was waiting. Chidera looked at Azoka, seeing a proud young man who was clearly furious but completely trapped by his grandfather's relentless pressure. Part of her screamed to walk out the door and never look back, knowing that marrying a total stranger in a matter of hours was absolute madness. Yet the painful image of her mother's precious belongings being tossed into the garbage by her heartless aunt flashed before her eyes. Steeling her resolve, Chidera whispered that she would accept the terms and repay the loan, while Azoka quietly observed her, searching for any sign of deceit. The heavy weight of desperation hung in the air, and Azoka knew all too well how it drove people to make reckless choices. Let us look closer at this quiet registry office, where Papa had already pulled strings to set everything in motion. A lawyer sat waiting, while two of Papa's loyal workers stood by as witnesses. Chidera felt utterly lost in a daze, her mind spinning too fast to ask how her life had shifted so rapidly. When asked if she was sure, she whispered, "Yes." Papa smiled, saying, "My children, this is a good day. My daughter, from today, you are family." Chidera thanked him softly, but Papa warned Azoka, "You treat her well. If I hear that you made her cry, I will deal with you myself." Azoka quietly replied, "Yes, Papa." "I am not joking," Papa insisted with a final, heavy look. Azoka nodded quietly, while Chidera promised they would try. "Not try, you will," the old man corrected. Yet the very second Papa's car pulled away, the warm atmosphere evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp tension. Azoka turned to her with icy detachment, saying, "Let us be clear." Chidera looked back, responding calmly, "I am listening." He continued, "This marriage happened because of my grandfather. Do not imagine it is real." She agreed quietly, knowing they were total strangers. But when he suddenly asked for her phone number, she was puzzled. "Even if it is not real to you," she reminded him, "this is still a legal marriage." "If Papa asks for your number and I do not have it, what will I say?" Azoka pointed out, prompting her to hand over her contact. In return, she slid a folded piece of paper into his palm. "What is this? For the 2 million naira? You wrote me an IOU?" Chidera nodded, explaining that while she knew it changed nothing, she wanted him to know she was not taking advantage of him. He reminded her dryly that she had demanded money to marry him, but she defended herself. "I asked because I was desperate, not because I wanted your money," she said, her voice cracking as she spoke of her late mother's hospital bills and the keepsakes held by her aunt. "I know you were forced into this," she finished softly. "I know you did not choose me," Chidera admitted, promising to repay every single naira. When he asked with what job, she explained she studied jewelry design and had an upcoming interview, though she would keep doing food deliveries in the meantime. "Do you expect me to believe that?" he asked with deep skepticism. She replied calmly that she knew her own integrity, adding softly, "Please take care of Papa. He should not stand under the sun like that again." Azoka stared after her, astonished that despite her own struggles, she cared about the old man. Standing alone outside the registry with the IOU in his hand, he wanted to throw it away, yet his fingers refused to let go. He wanted to believe she was just like all the other opportunistic women he had met, but the paper remained in his hand. For the first time since his grandfather had brought up her name, Azoka Izani felt a flicker of doubt about his judgment of Chidera. Just then, his luxury car pulled up, and his personal assistant, Henry Bassi, stepped out. Henry explained that Papa had gone home, feeling his mission was complete. Henry cautiously asked if he should offer congratulations, prompting a sharp glare. "My grandfather forced it," Azoka snapped, before commanding that Chidera must never find out his true identity. "You mean she must not know you are the CEO of Izani Group?" Henry asked, and Azoka gave a firm nod. "Now you and I might wonder why a man of such immense power would go to such lengths, but Izani Group was a multi-billion-dollar empire, spanning real estate, luxury hotels, and oil services." Azoka explained he simply did not trust Chidera yet, dismissing her promise to repay the 2 million naira. "If she asks, I am a driver," he ordered. Henry struggled to hide his amusement, replying, "I am only trying to imagine you collecting salary as a driver." The very next morning, Chidera arrived at Sormi Designs, clutching her precious portfolio. This modest design company was suddenly teeming with nervous applicants, all because the corporate giant, Izani Group, had just finalized its quiet acquisition of the firm. Excited whispers filled the lobby about the young, handsome, and incredibly wealthy CEO of Izani Group. An applicant asked Chidera if she was also hoping to catch his eye, but Chidera replied quietly that she was married and simply needed a job to clear her debts. As she entered the waiting room, her heart sank at the sight of Angela Okoro, a wealthy former university classmate who had always taken pleasure in looking down on her. "Chidera Okafor, so it is true," Angela sneered loudly, mocking her for delivering food. "Work is work," Chidera replied, keeping her head high despite the sting. Angela laughed mockingly at how the top jewelry student had fallen so low. But Chidera remained focused on the interview. "Please judge me by my work, not by my poverty," Chidera requested firmly as the interviewers examined the portfolios. However, the panel frowned, noting that her designs were nearly identical to Angela's. Angela immediately pointed an accusing finger, crying out, "Ma, this pauper Chidera stole my work." Chidera defended herself, reminding Angela that she was the one who used to copy her in school. When asked to explain the concept, Angela could only offer shallow buzzwords about beauty and class. Chidera, however, spoke from the heart. She explained the necklace was inspired by her late mother's beads, where the 3 curved gold lines symbolized patience, dignity, and courage amidst deep personal loss. The interviewers coldly dismissed Chidera, noting that Angela came highly recommended because of her uncle's connection to the board. When Chidera asked if they would even bother to verify the truth, they snapped at her to leave before she embarrassed herself further. Just then, Azoka walked toward the room and inquired about the commotion. Henry handed him the files, pointing out that one design was a masterpiece, while the other was a crude copy. As Azoka prepared to step inside, he spotted Chidera and froze. Realizing that his cover would be completely blown if she saw the staff bowing to him, he quickly turned to his assistant and whispered, "You are the boss, sir." To keep up the charade, Henry introduced Azoka as his driver. Chidera looked confused, but Henry quickly cleared his throat to command the room, asking what the issue was. The corrupt interviewers eagerly accused Chidera of stealing Angela's work. Standing silently behind his assistant, Azoka whispered sharp, analytical questions into Henry's ear, pointing out the obvious flaws in Angela's stolen piece. Guided by his boss, Henry confronted the panel about the wrong measurements and empty concept in Angela's file. Despite Angela protesting about her powerful uncle, Henry remained firm. "That is not talent," he declared, demoting Mrs. Cole and Mr. Dele on the spot, pending a full review. "Angela Okoro, you are disqualified from this interview," Henry announced, leaving her utterly shocked, while Chidera was offered the job on the spot. Chidera was overwhelmed with gratitude, turning to Azoka to thank him for his help. But Azoka remained guarded, replying dryly, "Your work helped you. If it was not good, nobody would have hired you." He walked away quickly, trying to ignore the warmth her beautiful smile stirred in his chest. Later that day, his grandfather cornered him, demanding to know where he was going. When Azoka said he was heading to his own mansion, the old man scoffed. "You are married now. Go and live with your wife," he insisted, refusing to let Azoka escape his plan. Imagine the sheer irony of this moment. As a multi-billionaire is forced to seek shelter in a tiny, single-room apartment. His grandfather had threatened to reveal his identity to Chidera if he dared to check into a hotel, and Azoka knew the old man never made empty promises. So, later that night, he stood on her doorstep holding a single bag. Chidera was surprised to see him, asking if his landlord had kicked him out because he could not pay rent. Azoka played along, and she kindly welcomed him inside. He compared this tiny space to his sprawling mansion and almost laughed. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, prompting her to tease him about the temperamental circuit breaker. "Were you scared?" Chidera teased as the darkness enveloped them, though Azoka quickly insisted he was not. She laughed, pointing out that he looked like he had seen a ghost, before handing him a plate of food. He tried to refuse, but she insisted he eat before his stomach disgraced him. Azoka took a bite and was genuinely impressed, remarking that it was better than what his cook made. Catching his slip of the tongue, he quickly lied that he meant his friend's sister. Chidera proudly shared that she could cook, sew, change tires, and survive any hardship. When he asked who taught her all this, her eyes softened with memory. "Life," she said, before slipping out to do her night deliveries. Azoka insisted on joining her, refusing to let her go out into the dangerous night alone. Although she teased him about being afraid of the dark, she finally agreed to let him tag along. That night, Azoka witnessed the harsh reality of her daily grind. He watched in silence as an angry customer yelled at her for being late, demanding a full refund for cold food. Chidera apologized politely and promised to process it, but Azoka was furious, telling her she should stop this delivery work. She looked at him with amusement, asking if he would feed her. "I will support you," he offered, but she laughed, telling the homeless driver to support himself first, right before a passing car brushed her bike. It is quite fascinating to watch how quickly people judge others based on outward appearances, and Tunde Briggs was no exception. He stepped out of his car, furious about a minor scratch, and began mocking Chidera. When Azoka stepped in, Tunde sneered, especially when Chidera introduced him as her husband. Tunde laughed hysterically, pointing out Azoka's suit and high-end watch, mocking them as cheap knockoffs. "That watch looks like the rare one belonging to the Azani CEO," Tunde laughed, concluding that a real billionaire would never stand in a dusty street with her. Believing he had all the power, Tunde demanded 500,000 naira on the spot to cover the damage. "We are not paying for your lie," Chidera asserted, standing her ground against Tunde's demands. Azoka quietly pulled out his phone and sent a brief text to Henry, initiating a swift corporate move. Shortly after, Tunde drove off proudly, but his arrogance quickly turned to panic when he and Angela got into a massive argument over a sudden 2 million naira bill for car damage. Chidera watched the couple yell at each other in the street, blaming one another for the mounting costs. She laughed aloud at the ridiculous spectacle, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. For once, the bullies who had tormented her were tasting a bitter dose of their own medicine. As we watch them in this quiet room, we can see the storm brewing beneath the surface of their fragile union. Azoka looked at Chidera's face and smiled softly, realizing how much he enjoyed seeing her happy. He gently knelt to tend to her bruised ankle, murmuring, "You do not have to suffer alone anymore." His tenderness touched her deeply, but it also prompted a solemn warning. She explained that she despised bullies and liars, recounting how her father's deception had destroyed her mother.
"If you ever lie to me, Azoka, I will divorce you," she said firmly. Azoka lowered his eyes in guilty silence, knowing he was already lying about everything. The next morning, he slipped out before she woke.
Let us step into this world together, where secrets are the most dangerous currency of all. Azoka warned his driver to never bring the luxury company vehicle near his neighborhood again, his voice sharp with anxiety. The driver, confused, greeted him respectfully, asking for a reason, but Azoka shut him down instantly. If Chidera were to spot him stepping out of such a high-end car, her sharp mind would start piecing things together. Henry wondered why a billionaire would hide his true self when any woman in Lagos would kill to marry into the prestigious Azani group. Yet, Azoka knew Chidera was entirely different. When he arrived home, she handed him a packed lunch, teasing him gently for looking so utterly shocked, as if no one had ever shown him such simple kindness before. A quiet gratitude filled Azoka as he admitted that, indeed, nobody had ever packed a meal for him. Chidera smiled warmly, urging him to eat every bite and not act like a proud big man who wastes food. He offered to drive her to work, and though she insisted she could manage on her own, he firmly demanded she call him when her shift ended. The sweet title of husband slipped from her lips, sending a sudden warmth straight to his heart. But her day turned sour at the office when she ran into the arrogant Angela. Despite being disqualified, Angela sneered that interviews were only for powerless people. With her uncle on the board, she had easily secured the job and immediately dumped a massive pile of files onto Chidera. Chidera flatly refused to touch the extra files, but Angela was not used to hearing the word no. She immediately threatens to call her powerful uncle, vowing to make sure Chidera's driver husband lost his brand new job at the Azani group. Hearing Azoka's name made Chidera freeze. She could risk her own career, but she could not let her husband suffer because of her. Reluctantly, she agreed to do the work. When Tina, a kind colleague, offered to help her with one of the heavy files, Angela viciously intervened, warning Tina that she would be fired along with Chidera if she dared to help. Left with no choice, Chidera stayed late. When Azoka called to check on her, he was deeply troubled to hear that his wife was already buried in piles of work on her very first day. Chidera quietly assured him she would call once she was done, not wanting him to worry. Meanwhile, Azoka was furious, demanding to know why a new recruit was working late when he had specifically ordered that no new staff should face overtime pressure. Bypassing his managers, he decided to investigate personally, stopping to buy a warm meal for her on the way. When he walked into the quiet office, Chidera was shocked to see her husband holding a food container. He immediately recognized the sheer volume of work and deduced that the spiteful Angela was behind it. Chidera tearfully admitted that Angela's uncle sat on the board and had threatened to have Azoka fired. She begged him to ignore it and avoid any trouble, believing his fragile livelihood was at stake. A deep wave of emotion hit Azoka when he realized she had taken on all this brutal stress just to protect his job. He immediately offered to help her with the design work, but she looked at him skeptically, questioning how a driver could understand complex corporate design. He quickly covered by claiming he frequently reviewed high-level documents for the chief executive officer. Working with incredible speed and precision, his brilliant ideas flowed effortlessly, leaving Chidera completely amazed by his intellect. Together, they refined the project until it looked absolutely flawless, far exceeding anything Angela could have dreamed of. Exhausted but grateful, Chidera thanked him, only to realize he had forgotten to eat his own simple meal because he was too focused on helping her. Chidera saw right through his excuses and demanded the truth, forcing him to admit he was skipping meals to save money. When she asked why, he confessed he was desperate to pay back the outstanding 2 million naira she had helped him with. In response, Azoka quietly slipped his own salary card into her hand, explaining that, as a married couple, they had to share their burdens. He begged her to stop starving herself on his account, but she immediately tried to push the card back, insisting she could not take his hard-earned money. With a firm look, Azoka told her that refusing his help meant she did not truly accept him as her husband. She could only stare at him, finding his sudden authority both strange and surprisingly commanding. He jokingly agreed that he might be bossy, but he was also completely broke. The very next morning, the corporate reality shifted when Angela and her design team were summoned to the manager's office. The manager slammed the files down, calling Angela's original design absolute nonsense that the client had utterly rejected. However, the brilliant corrected version submitted by Chidera had received overwhelming praise. Realizing Angela had lazily pushed her responsibilities onto the new hire, the manager publicly commended Chidera. He handed her a well-deserved cash bonus and a coveted golden ticket to the exclusive Azani Group annual gala, an incredibly prestigious event reserved only for top executives and VIP clients. A sudden knock at the door interrupted Chidera's evening, revealing a vibrant woman who burst inside with joyful energy. Azoka's mother, Margaret, immediately chided her son for trying to hide his beautiful new bride from her. Chidera greeted the elegant woman with deep respect, but Margaret insisted on being called Mom right away. Terrified that his mother's obvious wealth would expose his secret, Azoka quickly lied, claiming his mother was simply a professional actress who was currently playing a wealthy socialite in a movie. He nervously explained that her expensive designer outfit and fancy bottle of wine were just props. Margaret laughed, thoroughly amused by her son's quick-thinking cover story, and instantly decided she loved this girl. Let us pause for a moment to watch the walls of Azoka's elaborate deception begin to fracture, as he witnessed his mother's deep affection for Chidera. Margaret presented her with a stunning designer gown and a breathtaking necklace for the upcoming gala, brushing off Chidera's hesitation by claiming she bought them all at a cheap clearance sale. When the grand evening finally arrived, Chidera walked into the venue looking absolutely radiant, though her heart pounded with anxiety. At the entrance, she was immediately confronted by Angela and her malicious friends, Ivy and Laura. They sneered at her golden invitation, loudly mocking her and claiming it was a cheap forgery, since their own standard-issue passes were blue. Angela loudly accused her of trying to sneak in, demanding to know where Chidera had printed her fake ticket. However, the security supervisor stepped in, examined the gold card with deep respect, and announced it was a top-level VIP pass. Once inside the main hall, the jealous bullies continued their assault, whispering nasty rumors about Chidera's elegant dress being rented and her gorgeous necklace being cheap plastic. Soon, the master of ceremonies announced that the highly anticipated Midnight Star necklace would not be displayed because a private buyer had purchased it. Hearing this, Angela seized the opportunity to boast to the entire room, proudly lying that her wealthy family had bought the masterpiece. A sudden shock hit Chidera when she noticed that the necklace, resting on Angela's collarbone, looked identical to the masterpiece she was wearing. Angela immediately noticed the resemblance too, loudly accusing Chidera of creating a cheap, desperate counterfeit. But Chidera stood her ground, calmly pointing out that Angela's diamond was dull, lacked a deep shine, and had rough, unpolished edges that proved it was the actual fake. Furious at being exposed, Angela screamed for the security guards to throw Chidera out. Just as the guards grabbed her, Azoka stepped forward, his powerful voice commanding them to release his wife. Angela laughed mockingly, pointing him out to the crowd as nothing but a lowly driver. Angela sneered, asking if the lowly driver had come to defend his wife's fraudulent jewelry. Azoka calmly proposed a foolproof test, noting that a genuine gemstone would easily withstand a specialized testing liquid, while a fake would be ruined. Although Angela tried to back down nervously, the crowd watched in silence as the liquid exposed her necklace as a cheap imitation. Azoka revealed to the stunned guests that her family never bought the Midnight Star, but instead manufactured low-grade replicas. Before Angela could recover, her powerful uncle, Chief Victor Okoro, rushed into the hall. He instantly bowed to Azoka, calling him Boss Azani, but Azoka quickly interrupted, pretending to just be a simple driver. Looking around the silent room, Azoka asked what was going on, giving Chief Victor a subtle but cold look. Realizing his niece had crossed a dangerous line, Chief Victor immediately announced that Angela was fired and blacklisted for corporate corruption and fraud. He admitted that his nepotism had severely damaged the firm and agreed that substantial compensation must be paid directly to Chidera. As Angela was dragged out screaming for help, Chidera's mind raced with confusion. She demanded to know why a powerful chief had addressed him as Boss Izani. Azoka quickly spun another lie, claiming that because he drove the real CEO, Henry, people often got their identities completely mixed up. If you and I were in Azoka's shoes, we would probably feel the exact same tightening in our chest during this quiet conversation. Chidera did not fully buy his weak explanation, but the sheer exhaustion of the evening kept her silent. However, the fragile peace did not last long at home. She thoughtfully asked him if he believed Boss Izani might actually have feelings for her, given the massive compensation payout he had authorized. A sudden spike of jealousy hit Azoka's chest before he realized he was actually envying himself. He quickly dismissed her theory as pure nonsense, but Chidera only smiled, teasing him gently about how incredibly jealous he sounded of his own wealthy employer. Chidera decided she wanted to use a significant portion of the compensation money for a special purpose. The next morning, she guided Azoka to a humble orphanage where she had spent years volunteering her time. The elderly director welcomed Chidera with open arms, deeply touched when Chidera presented a bank account containing a massive donation under both her and her husband's names. The director wept at such generosity, but Chidera insisted the children deserved every single bit of support. Turning to Azoka, she explained her dream of using the remaining funds to launch a charity foundation, asking if he could use his connections with Boss Izani to help her make this beautiful dream a reality. Chidera firmly believed that because the money had not come from her own hard work, it belonged to those in need. When Azoka questioned why she would not use it to clear her own heavy debts, she simply replied that she was young and capable of working. Watching her interact with the orphans, Azoka felt a profound wave of respect wash over him. She did not worship wealth. She only sought true dignity. Suddenly, a little boy pointed at Azoka, declaring he recognized him from television as the wealthiest man in the country. Chidera laughed it off, explaining the child had simply confused him with the famous CEO. The playful boy then insisted that if they were truly married, they had to kiss right there. The children began chanting for a kiss, causing Chidera's cheeks to turn a deep shade of crimson as she begged Azoka not to laugh at her. He denied it, though his eyes danced with genuine amusement and affection. Standing there, Azoka felt the emotional distance between them melting away into a warm, comfortable bond, making his secret identity feel like a heavy burden he needed to shed. By Monday morning, Chidera's professional life took a massive leap forward at Seri Designs. The management officially promoted her to design director, ignoring the bitter complaints of older staff by stating that the firm valued true talent over empty noise, and Chidera vowed to prove they had made the right choice. As we reach the end of this chapter, you and I can see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon of their quiet lives. Azoka, secretly acting through his corporate team, ensured that Chidera's promotion was finalized, feeling immensely proud of her well-earned success. However, her joy was interrupted by a sudden, suspicious invitation from her estranged Aunt Florence. Since Chidera's mother had passed away, this aunt had never reached out without a selfish motive. When Chidera hesitantly mentioned the family dinner to Azoka, he immediately offered to accompany her to ensure her safety. She gently declined, insisting it was just a quick family gathering, completely unaware of the trap waiting for her. Today, you and I are entering a world of secrets. Aunt Florence's phone buzzed with a message asking for the address, but she dismissed the sender, murmuring that they worried too much. Chidera would indeed be at the restaurant in Lagos tonight, set up to be handled quietly. Soon Chidera met Kelvin Lau, a stern young man whose mother boasted that any woman who married her successful son would live in comfort. Florence urged Chidera to accept this opportunity, but Chidera felt cornered, realizing this was a matchmaking trap. Kelvin coldly told Chidera that after they married, she would stop working to focus on the home and quickly produce grandchildren. Feeling insulted, Chidera rose to leave, but Florence hissed at her to sit down and not disgrace her. Chidera's voice was calm but firm as she shattered their plans, announcing she was already married. Aunt Florence gasped in shock, while Kelvin's mother glared, accusing Florence of bringing a married woman for her son. Desperate to save face, Florence insisted the marriage could be canceled. Kelvin's mother then suggested they simply reduce the bride price to 80,000 naira, treating Chidera like used goods. Outraged, Chidera snapped back, refusing to be priced like second-hand furniture. When Florence tried to guilt her using past family favors, Chidera stood her ground, declaring that while her late mother had carried Florence's family for years, she would never allow herself to be used. Florence shoved an agreement forward, demanding Chidera sign it, but Chidera flatly refused. Just as Kelvin reached out to force her, a powerful voice cut through the room, demanding to know who dared touch his wife. It was Azoka, standing tall and protective. Florence sneered, mocking his handsome face and empty pockets, calling him a mere driver. Chidera defended her husband, calling him gentle and responsible, which made him far better than Kelvin. Seeking to humiliate them, Kelvin claimed Chidera ruined his shoes, demanding 200,000 naira. He boasted of his ties to the Azani group, but Azoka calmly offered 1 million naira for the shoes and 2 million naira for his pride. Kelvin laughed, boasting that he was not intimidated because the mighty Azani group backed him. Azoka simply replied that they did not, before dialing his phone and ordering an immediate end to all cooperation with Kelvin Lau's firm, blacklisting them. Kelvin mocked him, assuming he was just calling another driver, but his phone rang seconds later with devastating news of his company's ruin. Azoka warned them that further harassment of Chidera would bring harsher consequences. Later, Chidera wondered how a driver could wield such power. Azoka quickly lied, claiming the firm was already under investigation and the cash was just stage money for an event. Chidera nodded, but deep down, doubt lingered. Sleep evaded Aunt Florence that night as she worked her gossip network, desperate for answers. By the following afternoon, her digging revealed a jaw-dropping truth. Azoka was no driver, but the wealthy CEO and sole heir of the Azani Group. It infuriated her to think that Chidera had married into such a family. However, when she uncovered the name of Vanessa Adebanjo, Azoka's elite ex-fiancée, a wicked smile spread across Florence's face. If Chidera was kept in the dark, Vanessa could easily drive her away. Florence immediately sent her findings to Vanessa. Meanwhile, Azoka's mother planned a family dinner in a rented modest house, warning her son that a single slip-up would expose their massive wealth. Anxiety hung in the air as Azoka's family prepared for Chidera's arrival, determined to avoid any costly mistakes. When they met, his father embraced Chidera warmly, calling her his daughter. Although the dinner felt cozy, a web of lies filled the rented house. Chidera noticed the lavish plates, which still bore the logo of a five-star restaurant underneath, but Azoka's mother quickly lied, claiming a friend gifted them. Later, the mother almost exposed the ruse by pointing toward the wrong bathroom, awkwardly laughing that she was still getting used to the place. Touched by their warmth, Chidera admitted she had not felt such care since her own mother died, hoping they would remain her family forever. With her inhibitions loosened by wine that night, Chidera looked at Azoka and asked why he had never touched her since they were married. Azoka tried to calm her, whispering that she was drunk, but she sadly murmured that perhaps he simply did not like her. He desperately wanted to confess his love. But before the words could leave his lips, she fell asleep against the pillow. Later, his parents discussed their hope that the two would build a real marriage before Vanessa returned. Azoka made his stance clear, stating Vanessa had abandoned them when they struggled, and that Chidera was the only wife he would ever want. But peace was brief, and the next week, Vanessa Adebanjo stepped into Sari Designs. As we watch this unfold, you and I can see the storm brewing. Vanessa confronted Chidera at her workplace, coldly identifying herself as the woman whose rightful place had been stolen. Confused, Chidera insisted she did not know her, but Vanessa accused her of seducing her fiancé, the CEO of Azani Group. When Azoka arrived, Vanessa sneered, pointing him out as the billionaire boss, realizing with malicious joy that Chidera had no idea who her husband really was. Vanessa mocked Azoka for choosing roadside food with a poor girl, but he demanded she respect his wife. Vanessa laughed, declaring he belonged in high society, forcing Azoka to lie and claim she was just a childhood friend whose engagement had ended. With a parting sneer, Vanessa warned Chidera that one day she would finally realize who she had married. Once Vanessa left, Chidera confronted Azoka, deeply hurt that he had hidden his former fiancé. Azoka pleaded that he only kept quiet to avoid any misunderstandings, promising never to hide anything from her again. Just then, his phone rang, and Chidera urged him to answer it. Azoka snapped at Vanessa over the line, refusing her invitation to her birthday party the next day. However, Vanessa played the victim, claiming she only wanted formal closure to end the engagement in front of their families. Reluctantly, Azoka agreed to go, unaware that ending the engagement was the furthest thing from her mind. Unmasking Azoka was Vanessa's ultimate goal, knowing that the shock of his true identity would shatter his marriage. Azoka had walked straight into her trap, completely blind to her schemes. To orchestrate her next move, Vanessa paid Chidera's friend, Helen, to pretend her child was sick and begged Chidera to cover a cake delivery. Chidera hesitated, explaining she had quit deliveries, but her kind heart could not ignore Helen's pleas. When Chidera arrived at the luxury venue with the heavy box, Vanessa greeted her with a smirk. Vanessa insisted on inspecting the cake, only to deliberately drop it, immediately shrieking and accusing a bewildered Chidera of destroying it on purpose. Though Chidera protested that someone had pushed her, the wealthy guests sneered, claiming they saw her drop it. Vanessa mocked her, stating the cake cost more than Chidera earned in months. Desperate to protect Helen, Chidera offered to pay, but Vanessa demanded she kneel and clean the mess, or Helen would be fired immediately. Just as Chidera's hands tightened in humiliation, Azoka arrived, demanding to know who was responsible. Vanessa quickly tried to silence him, brightly announcing to the entire room that she and Azoka were celebrating their upcoming engagement. Azoka stood frozen in disbelief, before shouting at Vanessa to stop her nonsense in front of the stunned crowd. Vanessa laughed off his anger, asking why he was suddenly shy about an arrangement their families made years ago. Azoka firmly cut her off, announcing to the shocked crowd that he was already married to Chidera. Whispers erupted as guests realized the billionaire CEO of Azani Group had married a simple delivery girl. The truth hit Chidera like a blow as the puzzle pieces finally clicked. The gala, the expensive necklace, and the children at the orphanage who swore they saw him on TV. Staring at her husband, she asked if he was Boss Azani, realizing he had lied to her. Azoka pleaded to explain, but Vanessa chimed in with a smirk, happily confirming the massive betrayal. With a cruel sneer, Vanessa asked Chidera if she believed a man of Azoka's stature would ever marry someone so poor openly. Right on cue, Kelvin Lal, his mother, and Aunt Florence stepped forward, making Chidera's heart drop as she realized the ambush was complete. Kelvin's mother loudly proclaimed to the guests that Chidera was a fraud who accepted a bride price while already married. Kelvin held up the signed document, claiming Chidera agreed to marry him. Chidera cried out that the paper was forced on her, but Florence snapped at her to stop pretending, twisting the narrative to make Chidera look like a greedy girl who wanted both a billionaire and another man. As the crowd whispered insults, Azoka's voice roared for them to shut up, warning Florence and Kelvin that another lie would cost them their livelihoods. He knew they had forced Chidera into that sham contract for money, but Chidera was done with them all, weeping as she declared she never wanted their wealth or rich games. She had only wanted to work, live honestly, and pay her debts. When Azoka softly said he knew, Chidera snapped, telling him he understood nothing. The ultimate betrayal was not his billions, but that he watched her struggle, counting pennies and writing deliveries in the dark, all while pretending to be just as poor as she was. Now, you and I are witnessing the painful fracturing of a marriage built on secrets. Chidera declared she could not live a lie, prompting Azoka to beg her to stop. But the words left her lips anyway. She wanted a divorce. Turning to a smug Vanessa, Azoka hissed that she should not celebrate because he would never marry her. Later, Azoka tracked Chidera to her tiny room. She asked why a billionaire with mansions and hotels was standing in her cramped space. Azoka confessed that his initial distrust made him hide his identity, fearing she only wanted his family name, but he had fallen deeply in love with her and feared losing her. He admitted his delay was a mistake he deeply regretted. As we reach this turning point, you and I can feel the weight of their history. Chidera agreed he was wrong, stating that his fear did not excuse his deception and ordered him to leave. Azoka refused to go, standing outside in the biting cold until his body gave out and he collapsed. Terrified, Chidera called out for Henry to help carry the feverish billionaire inside. Soon after, Azoka's mother arrived, not to force Chidera back, but to explain his deep-seated trauma. She revealed that after Azoka's father died, the Azani group nearly collapsed. The people they trusted most abandoned them, and Vanessa's family, the Adebanjos, broke the engagement, leaving them in public shame. Let us look closely at how a man's heart can turn to stone. Azoka learned early on that when wealth vanishes, human devotion vanishes with it, leaving only betrayal. While his lies were deeply hurtful, they were never born of malice, but of a desperate fear of trusting the wrong person. Now, as the heavy silence stretched between them, Chidera quietly finished packing her things in Lagos, her heart breaking. When she handed him the divorce papers, he flatly refused to sign. Yes, he was the heir to the massive Izani group, but before all those billions, he was simply her husband. To him, pedigree meant absolutely nothing. Yet he knew the elite would always look down on her humble background, treating her as lesser. Chidera did not give a damn about what high society whispered, but Azoka cared deeply, wanting to shield her from the venomous gossip of Lagos. She was exhausted from constantly having to prove that she loved the man, not his vast fortune. Though he desperately refused to sign the divorce papers, he promised not to force her to stay, choosing instead to wait patiently for her heart to soften. Meanwhile, Vanessa's bitterness festered, and she quietly instigated a campaign of harassment against Chidera at Cerami Designs. Jealous colleagues staged a cruel drama, falsely accusing Chidera of stealing a missing necklace. They planted the jewelry in her bag just to humiliate her, convinced that a poor girl would always fold and cry when caught. The hostile designers sneered that she did not deserve her position, demanding to ransack her bag for more stolen items. But before they could violate her dignity, Azoka's booming voice shattered the tension, commanding them to keep their hands off his wife. The employees, still believing he was just a humble driver, tried to dismiss him, but panic froze the room when directors bowed to their billionaire CEO. Azoka's eyes burned with cold fury. He fired and blacklisted the schemers immediately. Yet, as he reached out to comfort Chidera, She turned away, weeping because her hard-earned career was now completely overshadowed by his wealth. Azoka tried to reassure her that the staff would respect her now, but Chidera knew the bitter truth. They would only cower in fear, which was a world away from true respect. She had fought so hard to be recognized for her raw creative talent, not to be labeled as the wealthy CEO's trophy wife. With her dreams shattered by his deception, she made the painful decision to resign from Cerami Designs, cutting ties with the company and the endless corporate drama. Even as Azoka pleaded with her to stay, he felt a crushing wave of despair, realizing that his protective instincts were actually driving her away. Meanwhile, watching from the shadows, a bitter Vanessa burned with jealousy, furious that Chidera still held her head high despite losing everything. Vanessa and Angela huddled in the dark, plotting a ruthless scheme to strip Chidera of everything she possessed by using her as leverage against Azoka. Their plan was simple: kidnap Chidera and force the billionaire to publicly announce his engagement to Vanessa on national television. While they spun their web of malice, Chidera sat alone in a dimly lit Lagos bar, nursing a drink to numb the overwhelming ache in her chest. She couldn't shake the memory of Azoka's tender hands wrapping her injured ankle, or his voice promising she would never be alone. She wondered how the very person who shattered her trust could still feel like her only safe haven. Lost in her dizzying sorrow, she barely noticed the predatory shadow of a strange man offering to take her home. The strange man gripped her arm with false kindness, guiding her stumbling steps out of the bar while her phone buzzed relentlessly with Azoka's unanswered calls. Back at his office, panic clawed at Azoka as his security team tracked her last known signal to the lounge, only to find she had been abducted. His blood ran cold with a mixture of terror and lethal fury, promising that whoever dared to touch his wife would pay a devastating price. Just then, his phone rang, and Vanessa's cold voice delivered a chilling ultimatum. Chidera was her captive, and her safe release would cost him a public engagement announcement at the Royal Crest Hotel the very next day. Azoka was ordered to come alone, or face the unthinkable consequences. When Azoka demanded to know what would happen if he refused, Vanessa's reply was like ice. He would never lay eyes on Chidera again. Desperate, the billionaire ordered his men to scour every inch of Lagos, refusing to sleep until his wife was found. Meanwhile, in a dusty, abandoned warehouse, Chidera woke up bound to a chair, facing her bitter tormentor. Vanessa mocked her, sneering that a poor girl should have stayed in her lane. But Chidera fiercely pointed out that while Vanessa could force a public stage, she could never force Azoka's heart. She reminded Vanessa of her betrayal when Azoka lost everything, accusing her of only loving his money. Beside Vanessa, Angela watched with cold eyes, ignoring Chidera's pleas of their shared school history. Angela's resentment overflowed as she spat out accusations, blaming Chidera for stealing her spotlight, her job, and her dignity since their school days. She laughed bitterly at how the high and mighty designer was now reduced to a helpless captive. Chidera pleaded with her old classmate, warning that this deep-seated hatred would never bring her peace. But Angela shut her down, declaring her malice was too deep to stop now. Meanwhile, at the Royal Crest Hotel, Vanessa watched the grand ballroom fill with reporters, anticipating her ultimate triumph. She ordered the guards to keep a close watch on Chidera, confident that she would return to the warehouse as the newly proclaimed wife of the most powerful billionaire in Lagos, ready to gloat. Let us step into that grand, crowded ballroom, where flashbulbs blinded the room. Journalists peppered Vanessa with questions about her impending union with the Azani family, and she smugly replied that today, order would finally be restored. When a bold reporter brought up the rumors of Azoka's existing marriage, she brushed it off as the desperate obsession of an unimportant girl. But as Azoka walked up to the podium, the atmosphere shifted to pure electricity. Instead of announcing an engagement to Vanessa, he looked directly into the cameras and declared his undying devotion to his actual wife, Chidera. He shocked the entire nation by announcing that he had officially transferred every single asset, share, and property he owned directly to Chidera's name. Azoka's voice rang with absolute conviction as he named Chidera his one and only wife, leaving the reporters in a state of sheer disbelief. He explained to the stunned crowd that if she felt unprotected or unworthy, his entire empire would now serve as her shield. Vanessa's eyes widened in horror as she realized her leverage was gone. She had chased the Azani name and fortune, but Azoka had stripped himself of both, giving everything to the woman she despised. When Vanessa spat threats of revenge, Azoka coldly reminded her that she had abandoned him during his darkest hours, while Chidera loved him when he was nothing but a driver. Just then, his head of security whispered the crucial update. They had finally traced Vanessa's call to an abandoned warehouse. The rescue team moved swiftly through the dark streets of Lagos as Azoka raced alongside them, his heart pounding with dread. Back at the warehouse, Angela's panic turned into pure murderous desperation, and she ordered her hesitant thug to end Chidera's life once and for all, convinced that only death would stop Azoka from choosing her. A violent struggle erupted as the kidnappers tried to overpower a fiercely fighting Chidera, pinning her down just as the warehouse doors were smashed open. Azoka and the police burst into the room, instantly arresting the hysterical conspirators who desperately tried to lie their way out of their crimes. Amidst the chaos, Azoka threw his arms around Chidera, weeping with relief as he held her close. Holding her tightly, Azoka whispered a solemn vow that he would always come for her, begging her forgiveness for the danger his secrets had brought into her life. Meanwhile, Vanessa's world collapsed as police officers slapped handcuffs on her wrists, ignoring her hysterical protests of innocence. The detectives presented overwhelming evidence, including recorded calls, bank transfers, and eyewitness statements that sealed her fate. Despite the chaotic rescue, Chidera insisted she was fine, her fierce independence flaring up even as Azoka desperately pleaded with her to see a medical professional. Even Papa Izani rushed to the scene, his elderly heart bursting with protective fury as he checked on his beloved granddaughter-in-law, ready to fight anyone who had dared to hurt her. The tension in the room dissolved into pure wonder when the doctor gently announced that Chidera was carrying a child and needed absolute rest. Papa Izani gasped, demanding the doctor repeat the miraculous news to his old ears, before breaking into tears of gratitude to see his great-grandchild. In that quiet moment, both Chidera and Azoka were pulled back to the memories of a simple, beautiful night in her tiny room, celebrating her promotion over cheap takeout on a plastic table. It was the night they had first confessed their feelings, raw and honest, long before the billionaire lies got in the way. A few days later, standing in his sprawling mansion, Chidera laughed dryly, teasing him for squeezing into her tiny rented room while owning this massive estate. Chidera stared at her husband, confessing she did not know whether to laugh at his absurdity or slap him for his elaborate deception. Azoka smiled sheepishly, admitting he deserved both, but preferred her laughter any day. He gently reminded her that every single asset, the mansion, the corporate shares, the vast lands, was now legally hers, making her the wealthiest party in their marriage. Chidera teased him, noting that if she chose to divorce him now, he would be completely homeless, a lesson he agreed might finally teach him total honesty. Yet, looking into his eyes, she whispered that her forgiveness had nothing to do with the billions, but with the fact that he finally chose her, nakedly and truthfully, before the entire world. Let us understand that Chidera truly valued how he protected her without trying to possess her. However, she issued a firm, playful warning. If he ever lied to her again, she would fire him as both her husband and her chief employee. Azoka took her words to heart, smiling at her fierce, unbreakable spirit. She made it clear that she had no intention of lounging around as a wealthy socialite. She wanted to keep designing and build a foundation to empower underprivileged children. Over the following months, the couple revolutionized the culture at Cerami Designs, establishing strict rules to ensure that no junior worker would ever be mocked or bullied because of their humble background. No hopeful job applicant in their company would ever be judged by their connections again, but solely on their raw merit. To prevent the kind of exploitation Chidera had suffered, every single creative portfolio was formally recorded, dated, and legally protected from theft. Chidera went a step further, launching a thriving mentorship program for brilliant young designers from low-income families who couldn't afford expensive training. Azoka happily provided the massive funding, but it was Chidera who poured her soul into running it day in and day out. Her proud friends teased her, pointing out they always knew he was the famous billionaire from television, leading to a warm family dinner invitation from Margaret. We can see that true love always finds its way back to the simplest truths. At the family dinner, Azoka dropped to one knee, admitting that their first marriage had been rushed by Papa's interference and shadowed by his own elaborate lies. He looked up at Chidera, asking if she would choose him again, not as a wealthy tycoon or a fake driver, but simply as himself. With tears of joy in her eyes, Chidera whispered her yes, making Papa Izani boast proudly that his matchmaking instincts were always flawless. Her journey had never been about chasing riches. It began when she bought bread for a hungry stranger in Lagos. In the end, she was cherished not for her husband's vast fortune, but for her own golden heart.